Hello and welcome to Vershows. This was actually something a subscriber asked me to do, so it's in a way memorable moment for my channel. Since this is my first video I've made on a subscriber suggestion or a demand, whatever you want to call it. First of all, a couple of words of game mats before I start. I've been playing D&D Frostgrave, Rangers of Shadowdeep and Oathmark mostly. So quite different games in terms of scenery sometimes. I always wanted to play with something other than a grid or just a plain cloth, so I started thinking of buying a game mat. But since I am a crafter and quite budget ideologist, I decided to try to do my own. So I've so far made two cloth game mats. One is a woodland and grassland on the other side, second one is snowy, only one side. I've also made one D&D grid with a castle grid on the other side and a woodland grid on the other side. So I think I have about enough of game mats at this point, so I won't be making a full 4 feet by 4 feet mat this time, since the amount of paint going into this is quite big and also depending on the thickness of the cloth, so how much it absorbs the paint. But still, it's cheaper than to buy a neoprene mat. And the painting is a fun process, which is always important to remember when doing crafts. Cloth is usually dirt cheap. You can find large tablecloths or curtains on Flea Store for only a couple of euros, and even cheaper. At least in Finland you can even find free curtains on the internet if you want to go that way. So enough chit chat and let's start. I scavenged one of my militaristic sand-colored t-shirts that has taken a bit of hit from my painting hobby, so it has specks of black paint on it. And I won't be using this t-shirt anymore. I first tend to iron these before painting. Sometimes the creases might be a nice texture, but not this time. I got a nice and big enough area to work with. Remember to take mats off if you're painting on the floor, and if you're painting on the floor, remember to use acrylics because they are easily washable off with water. Some of the paint will go through the cloth if the cloth is thin enough, like my t-shirt is. So, for the paintbrush, I cut a piece of mattress and I will be using this. You should get a nice texture on the part that you're using for the paint. So just rip small pieces off until it looks something like this, like a uneven surface. If you wanted something more futuristic, you could also just use it as a straight up cube, but the hard edges won't work for my woodland game mat this time. For colors, I take a little bit of everything but blue and green at this point. If you look outside of your window or go to a local park, you might realize that green is not even that major of a color in the forest and nature if you take out all the trees. So the ground is usually not that green as you might think. It's more brown, even yellow at some parts. So I started with reddish brown for the bottommost layer, that is dirt. So you should think of this as layers. First the ground layer, then the middle layer, and then the top layer, and then of course the highlights and stuff like that. So we'll start with the bottom layer. Just start punching the canvas and make sure to get a nice looking texture that still leaves room for the canvas's color to pop out from under it. I would advise to use light brown or very light grayish green if you want to make a forest mat for the color of the cloth. If you use a green, it will look more like a grassland, so always remember that even though forests are green, the ground necessarily is not. I used a couple of layers of light yellow and different shades of red on the first paint. And if you get too hard edges or dotty texture, you can squeeze and push and mush on the canvas with the paintbrush to make them blur and pretty much go away and mix with the other colors around it. And at this point it doesn't matter if the texture gets blurry at points. Next it's time for the green. I mixed the green color with a hint of grey to make it not so vibrant. I also applied the color in quite large texture on the brush. Think of doing small batches of leaves, roots, small mossy areas and stuff like that. Now it's time to do the same with the black color, but just used more lightly. There aren't too many black parts on the ground usually, some sticks, dark rocks and stuff like that, but mainly it's just shadows cast off from the sticks and rocks. Then it's time to mush this all together with a rough layer of puffy green. Also, this is the part where you should do random areas like trails and pathways if you want to, and I will make something like that. Don't take too much paint on the brush at the same time. If you take too much of the color, it will pop out too much and you will have to start blurring the colors again. So only so that you're starting to getting the color on the canvas after hitting it several times. Even a small area like this takes endurance, so imagine if the canvas was 4 times as large, and trust me, I've done it 3 times already. Next, and pretty much the final steps, the highlights. I tend to use white and then a light version of the most used colors or color. In this painting it would be light green and light red, or only one of them depending on what you want to achieve. Make it so that if you were to paint the white layer that you're doing now on a completely black canvas, it would look like space with only the stars visible. So only small specks of white at parts of the canvas. Then negative highlights, as I like to call them. Some might also call them shadows. I mostly do this on the brown areas now, since they look like they would have more shadows than the grassy areas, and I already have the black layer under this layer. And that's about it. Leave a like if you like this, sub if you haven't, and tell me in the comments what you think. I haven't seen many people do their own playmats, so it's always nice to get feedback on content like this. Hopefully see you next time. Bye.